Thank you very much, Thea. Okay, so our next speaker is going to be Michael Shallcross, and he's going to be speaking, as communists, we talk about the ideology. We Red Youth, we describe ourselves as a Marxist-Leninist organization. So Michael's going to be speaking about the contributions of Vladimir Lenin to the ideology and revolution.
Good evening, friends and comrades. I've been asked tonight to speak about contributions of Vladimir Lenin to revolutionary thinking. He is one of the greatest thinkers in the history of the struggle to overthrow capitalism, and as such, I will only be able to provide a very limited introduction to his ideas tonight, but I hope you still find helpful, especially if you're newer to this. However, I strongly encourage people to just see this as a starting out point and to study Lenin and Leninist political ideas beyond tonight. That being said, why Lenin? Why are people interested in Lenin? Perhaps because Lenin, more so than some other Marxist thinkers, focus on the political questions of how exactly to go about overthrowing this horrible system of capitalism. In other words, what is to be done by people who want a better world? Do we need a special organization? And if so, what type? Do we need a literal revolution to have socialism, or can it come about through a peaceful evolution out of the capitalist system itself? How should the movement against capitalism approach other forms of oppression that aren't just the oppression of workers by capitalists, but the oppression of colonialism, imperialism, and racism, amongst many others? But tonight I have two main thematic sections of a talk and two big themes of Lenin's work, which is Lenin's ideas on organization and Lenin's ideas on imperialism. And like I said, I'll try to be succinct. The Russian anti-capitalist movement in the pre-revolutionary period was certainly facing different circumstances and challenges than what we face today. However, then as now, Lenin and many other revolutionaries were troubled by how best to leverage the strength of the workers and oppressed as being A, the vast majority of society, and the generators of all wealth in the class struggle against the capitalist and other oppressors, which in Tsarist Russia also included the feudalistic monarchy. On the surface, these two features, which still apply today, would seem to make the workers, or as Marxists often refer to them, proletariat, the obviously invincible class against the Tsarist monarchy and the capitalist class and the Russian Empire at the time. Excuse me, I lost my point. However, ever since there were an oppressor class of any sort, from the very beginnings of class society, which started, and this is a different conversation, with the development of agriculture, there have been means and techniques and ways for the oppressors to control the oppressed. And probably the most infamous technique and the most widespread is the oppressed's acceptance of their own oppression, either by apathy or a hopelessness that does not allow them to even or a hopelessness that does not allow them to imagine that this flesh and blood world could be radically better. For those who escape the ideological prison within their own mind, the violence of the capitalist paid mercenaries, either, and most often the case this is, the form of the police and state officials who act on the behalf of the capitalist class, or also the directly hired thugs and strikebreakers of the capitalists themselves, are often there to push you back into your ideological cell or make sure you never get out of a prison. So there are two primary tasks: overcoming this ideological self-limitation on behalf of the vast majority of society, and the organized violence of the capitalist class in preventing the workers and oppressed from taking what is theirs. Until we are at the point of mass revolution, the first task is a primary one, and it becomes even more fruitful in a period of deep capitalist crisis like we are facing now. As conditions, obviously, if people see that the capitalism has taken away something that they felt like they had certain living situation, and they feel like it's been undercut, and they feel like social contract, which was never really there, was breached. It contributes to this social and ideological crisis, and as communists, our task is to take advantage of this and to exploit it to build a better world and open people's eyes. Mainly because mainly we have to focus on this struggle because in order to make a revolution the interest of workers and oppressed, the mass support of workers and oppressed is necessary, and in turn this requires the support for workers and oppressed for the communists, if not an acceptance of communist ideas on a full intellectual level. The capitalist class will at every turn oppose the communists, sometimes in open and sometimes in secret ways. And the capitalists have every imaginable tool at their disposal to do so. So a great deal of discipline is needed in order to coordinate revolutionaries' actions, especially when the Revolutionary Party must become a literal military organization in order to carry out the task of a revolution itself. Lenin's concept of democratic centralism accomplishes this by allowing the majority of a party to set the internal agenda of a party in a fair and democratic way, but requires all to accept and carry out the collective democratic decision, thereby reflecting our commitment to democracy and building a workers' democracy, while at the same time being effective in the class war. The point, after all, is to win. It is worth noting that in terms of overthrowing capitalism as organizations, whatever else their shortcomings, the only thing that's ever been proven, that's ever done it, so far, are communist parties. And unless you have your foot in the door, whatever criticisms that other ideological tendencies like to make, it doesn't matter. Because you need to at least make a revolution. And then, you can debate the virtues and merits of whatever policy or perspective of a party, but unless you can win, it doesn't matter. Lenin also saw changes in the way capitalism operated, and this is why I would also encourage people to study Marxist economics, because because the rise of the latest stage of capitalism, the last terminal stage of capitalism, which we are in right now, imperialism is informed by it. However, I can say this much. But rather basically, big business has become more and more monopolized as opposed to the 19th century version of capitalism. And having developed markets in the first world, but forever needing Dracula-like to suck out more and more profit, needs to expand to other countries, and in fact needs to wage war more and more and more, not only to stimulate its own economy through war spending, but open up new markets for capitalist commodities and to exploit the natural resources of oppressed countries. This development had many implications, and as the increased and ever-increasing exploitation of the Third World created divisions in the ranks of the world's workers, especially prior to the Bolshevik Revolution, that some terribly mistaken opportunists within the workers' movement, the more industrialized countries, saw themselves as being in alliance with their own imperialist, monopolist, capitalist class, because they thought that the fruits of imperialist plunder would trickle down to them. Lenin could not have disagreed more, because he saw the primary contradiction in the world today, and remains so, as being imperialism. And instead of being lapdogs, that workers in the industrialized world would never be free until they united with the oppressed in the underdeveloped nations. Lenin argued that communists had an absolute duty to fight for national liberation of the oppressed nations, even if those struggles were not led by communists or even socialists. Because imperialism is the fuel of global capitalism, and if it is deprived of its sweat and blood offerings, it would generate a deep crisis that would result in world revolution. Everywhere imperialist powers are the weakest, we find that this is the tip of the spear for global class struggle. In conclusion, like I said, I encourage people who are relatively new to Lenin's ideas to read some of his many books and books by Leninist authors, including books like The Bolsheviks and War by Sam Mercy. That's just one I can think of on top of my head that handles the role of communists and fighting imperialism brilliantly. So in conclusion, Lenin's ideas are key to making revolution. I would encourage everyone to learn more about his ideas and to attend our weekly meetings and study group where we do study Lenin every Saturday at this office at noon. Thank you.